Hi, everyone. We are back to our blockchain value conversation. We have such an amazing guest. I am really excited. And we're going to have an important conversation about Consortia and what it means and what you do with it and how you make it work. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I'll let Anthony to introduce himself. Anthony.
For those who don't know me, my name's Anthony Day. I'm a blockchain partner at IBM. My job is to help enterprise clients and governments to think about the role of blockchain technology in their digital transformations, how to think about multi-party systems, how to think about transforming the way that they do the jobs they've always been trying to do, some of the processes that might be a little bit broken, some of the objectives, some of the visions that they'd like to achieve of how to transform the way that we as customers, as citizens, as employees engage with these organizations and with their technology, but done in a different way, with multiple parties across multiple borders. That's what I do. Everything from strategy into architecture, into actually building, cutting code, launching into production, all of that.
Before IBM, there were more blockchain adventures. What were you doing before?
Yeah, so my entire career has been based in consultancy. So starting with strategy consulting at a company called Monitor Group, which was probably the best company I will ever have worked for. It's very sad that I don't work there anymore, that it was eventually subsumed into Deloitte. I was looking into digital strategy at Deloitte latterly because strategy moved into digital strategy because it was no longer enough just to think about business choices in isolation without the role of technology. Those two things became inherently intertwined in the same way as business decisions became intertwined with the internet and e-commerce over time. So I've spent the last sort of 10 years of my career working on digital strategy, and then was lucky enough while working at Deloitte here in Ireland to take a role as COO for their EMEA blockchain team, which was, again, a mix of developers, architects, business people, industry specialists to help, again, as I said, work on strategy, implementation, and management of blockchain projects. And then the last 18 months has been IBM, albeit a slightly stunted version of IBM because most of it has been within these four walls, unfortunately. But it is still possible to do blockchain in your bedroom. So don't worry about that. We've been plenty busy in the last 18 months as well. So that brings you, I think, relatively up to date.
Oh, and then it's not what was in the walls, it's what's up here. And what's up there is quite a lot. So we can ignore the walls and talk about possibilities. Would love for you to tell us about kind of specifics of what you're working on at IBM or the range of things you've been working at IBM.
Sure thing. And IBM is fairly well known, I think, at this point for blockchain technology. We work with enterprises and governments primarily. There's typically three areas of things where the work that we do in blockchain comes out. Before I get to that, I want to kind of demystify blockchain for those of you who are listening in who don't spend as much time looking into this space as I do, or who are frankly sick of hearing the word blockchain.
Are you going to take out magic out of blockchain?
I don't want to take the magic out of it, but I do want to take some of the hype out of it, because essentially
go for it.
What we're talking about here is developing technology platforms that help with agreeing standards between different parties around creating a single version of the truth or a view of data across multiple parties where previously there were silos, about automating certain activity in terms of visibility or transactions or business processes or approvals that previously we weren't able to do because we had a sequential process or we had paper in the way, where we're able to identify the identity or verify that there is a trusted person on the other side. It doesn't always have to involve a sharing of a specific identity, but at least that we know that that party is trusted. And again, where we're trying to break down walls and do that across multiple borders. These are some of the requirements or some of the features of the type of work we do. It usually involves multiple parties. It always involves multiple disciplines, right? And one of my favorite things to talk about is that we need more lawyers in blockchain, because typically what we're doing out here is we're breaking stuff, right? We are rewiring the way different business processes or the way different industries work, where you end up talking about things like antitrust or GDPR and data privacy, or the legality of certain transactions or legality around automation, right? Topics that I'm sure you're very familiar with and that you need lawyers.
We still haven't figured out how this applies on the internet, Anthony. So just ask any privacy lawyer, security lawyer, talk about GDPR, and just see their eyes roll and them sigh. I still want to talk to you about what you do at IBM, but you mentioned something important, which is data. And when it comes to blockchain, it is really kind of all about data. And one of the ways you can prepare for the unavoidable future of blockchain is actually making sure that you have the data and that it's clean data and that it has integrity. But actually, Anthony, help listeners understand why data is important.
Wow, how do I do that one concisely? What a great question. So data is the fuel for pretty much every form of automation in terms of an issue, an order, a requirement, an approval, a regulatory need. Right? Everything that we do involves some form of data going from one place to another, whether that's a financial transaction, moving a payment, whether that's placing an order on the internet, whether that's putting out a request for suppliers to provide you with certain materials that you need to assemble into a handbag, a dress, a vehicle, whatever that might be. In all of those processes, there's technology and there's data. Some of the things that get in the way of a smooth or a seamless or a trusted process is breakdowns in data flow, or lack of trust in data and information, or lack of availability of data at a certain point in time to make important decisions. And so what we have already tried to a certain point, engineer in is more data, more automation, more digitization of processes. But that's still fragmented in certain places. We still use Excel sheets and email to manage a lot of workflows and a lot of processes in the world. And that's not very efficient a lot of the time.
Oh, don't I know it? Don't I know that a lot of data lives in my email? Really cool. And so one way to prepare for the future is definitely figure out what data you have and how you can make sure you collect it better. But I want to come back to today. You said you're working on various enterprise and government projects. Tell us more. I know some of them have been in the news. Some of them are probably coming in the news. Tell us kind of the range, how you largely think about the array of projects that IBM have been working on.
Got you. So there's a really simple classification for the majority of the stuff that we do is it usually comes down to provenance, identity, or tokenization activities. So, and in some cases it can be all three, or it can be a mix of those two things. But ultimately, provenance really is about data quality, data integrity, and being able to join up multiple silos of data. So that could be relating to supply chain information, that could be related to sustainability or authenticity, or that certain things have happened at certain times. It could be relating to carbon credits. Right? There's a huge amount of focus now on sustainable supply chains, and that's something I spend a lot of my time focusing and helping clients understand, because ultimately a supply chain is just a series of parties connected to achieve a goal, which is get a handbag to Olga or get a motorcycle helmet to Anthony. I realize I've taken huge bias in those examples.
You got me excited. Let's talk about handbag for Olga. You completely got my attention here. Well, you're going to be my best friend if that's the conversation we're going to have. You talked about provenance. You talked about tokenization. And what was the third?
Identity management. So
among those three, you said some projects have a combination and some have individual parts. Are some of them more popular than others, or does it come in a wave depending on kind of political, economic climate, or over time? What kind of trends do you see with respect to these three large uses of blockchain?
So I think the OG use case of blockchain was always payments and transactions in financial services. So the tokenization concept happened early on, and you see lots of Ripple and Stellar-based projects. So 5, 6, 7 years ago, lots of cross-border payment, settlement, reconciliation, like Project Ubin in Singapore and a few others. Latterly, sort of following on from that, you saw lots of supply chain and kind of multi-party systems, data platforms type projects, because that was the next logical place that was low-hanging fruit. If you work with those parties you're already collaborating with, that's easy enough to do. You know who they are. You can identify the inefficiency. I would say the last 18 months has given a real, and I'm going to use a pun here, but I really didn't want to, a shot in the arm for digital identity. That's a COVID joke, and I'm really sorry. That's a terrible one, and I didn't mean to use it. But ultimately, the requirement to have a borderless way of verifying somebody's status relating to health, and particularly in this instance, COVID, but this could extend out to driver's licenses, passports. There have been a number of large-scale digital identity projects that have spun up in the last 18 months where IBM's been involved. IBM Digital Health Pass is quite known at this point in terms of some of the work we're doing in New York State and a number of other countries that we will eventually end up talking about. Collaboration with Amadeus launched this week. Lots going on in that space. And that's really exciting, not because of COVID, but because of what's possible when you can look at digitization of credentials and identity.
Really cool. And if you were to predict the future, not just to tell me the history lesson and what's happening today. Broadly speaking, where do you see the blockchain evolve, and on what timeline?
Oh, you're forcing me to make a prediction. I like that. So I can see kind of vanilla data platforms for business process continuing to scale, right? We've barely got more than 20% of enterprise data onto cloud at this point. So if we haven't even got that far, what level of maturity have we got to with blockchain networks and blockchain platforms, right? So we're lagging behind cloud adoption broadly. Not to say that you can't do blockchain on-prem, you can, but I would say you've still got a huge amount of penetration of multi-party processes of supply chain that will have a 10-year horizon, and there'll still be efficiency to gain because it's a big world and there's lots of inefficient process. I can see sort of transaction-based, token-based financial services use cases scaling right now. If you look at the amount of money that's locked up in decentralized finance, if you look at the interest in digital assets like Bitcoin and Ethereum, and shout to Dogecoin and SHIB and all of the above, right? That's captured the imaginations of millions. And will continue to do so. Whether we see that scaling out into payments, like Amazon has issued this week and said that they're looking at that, let's see. Right, crypto and payments, it's just another form of borderless money exchange. Don't know. And then the one that everyone enjoys talking about, I think, is non-fungible tokens, and whether we're going to see digital artwork, digital sneakers, the metaverse scaling out. I find it super, super interesting and exciting. We've got a collaboration with Ariane around luxury goods at the moment, which is doing some really, really interesting stuff. Can't tell you who because it's all top secret. And a lot of people in the luxury industry are very, very competitive. But that's the kind of the wild card for just having fun with it. But the bigger infrastructure plays, I think, have got lots of runway.
Yeah. I think NFTs are exciting, well beyond entertainment and luxury. You can wrap them up with smart contracts, and they can do all kinds of wonderful things. What I love talking to you, when I talk to you, what I love is that you are well experienced both on Ethereum, Hyperledger, and numerous other blockchain networks. So I find that your views are very rounded and not skewed. So thank you for sharing that and being here. A number of folks asked is about kind of the user experience. All you have to do is spend a week figuring out MetaMask, and you may or may not successfully get on the other side to know that the user experience is quite not there. So what are your thoughts? I mean, all of these use cases are great, and the infrastructure is fantastic. But at some point, like, Olgas need to be able to show up and not struggle with MetaMask for a week.
I hear you. And MetaMask and non-fungible tokens and public keys, private keys, all of that, it's not easy, right? At least now we can sign into MetaMask with a thumbprint, as opposed to having to remember your seed phrase all of the time, or having to remember 67 characters every time you want to type in.
67 alphanumeric. I mean, who can't remember that?
Yeah, good example. And I think it's not that the blockchain industry hasn't been thinking about user experience, and that the people involving in blockchain teams, that there is always a UX person. The challenge is interoperability, some of the standards and some of the connectivity between back end and front end just isn't there yet. It's not that we can't get there. Also, a lot of these platforms are relatively new. OpenSea still has a relatively clunky user experience on mobile versus web. These guys are trying to deal with some really big, fundamental, really exciting drops of functionality. And on that agile backlog of the things that they need to get through, those bugs and patches and stuff like that just sometimes don't make it to the top. But it is front and center. It should be part of every single blockchain project all of the time from day one. It's no different in blockchain as a priority than it should be anywhere else.
Let's talk about it. What is it, and why blockchain and Consortia can go together?
Ultimately, what you're trying to achieve with a data platform or a multi-party system, I'm going to take the blockchain word out of this because I think it's easier if you can describe it in technical or requirements terms. You're believing that if you can bring multiple parties together onto a platform, it becomes easier to do what you're trying to achieve as an outcome. In the same way as having lots of customers connected to an app and lots of taxi drivers connected to the same app, you can create Uber because the supply and demand is managed through a platform. In that way, it's centralized through Uber. In the same way as Facebook is centralized through Facebook, in the same way as digital content management and monetization is centralized through YouTube. With blockchain platforms, you try and take some of the power or the ownership of the platform out of the hands of an individual organization, so that you make it easier for parties to connect, you make it easier for them to share data, you make it more equitable as a place to do things, to share data, to transact, to operate. To do that, typically you need to form a consortium, or you need to have developed standards, structures, an integration model, an onboarding and offboarding model that anybody can access, that doesn't disproportionately favor any individual parties. And also, before you even get started, and this is a lot of the upfront strategy work that we do, is thinking through the process, the use case, the roadmap, and the business case. Who benefits and by how much for when you actually go and build this platform, because that will inform how much individuals should contribute, how your commercial model might work, before you even cut a single line of code.
So that sounds pretty complicated. I mean, I've negotiated many contracts, and I've been unfortunate enough to negotiate contracts with multiple parties. And getting multiple parties to see eye to eye, too many eyes, is a lot of work. You just made it sound really simple. You just agree on the strategy and who benefits and how much, and then you write it up and off we go. But in reality, the process of agreeing who benefits and how much and what the strategy is actually can take years.
Yes, it can. And the good news is we're getting faster at it, because there's more analogous examples. There are more platforms out there who've been through this. The approach that we take is continually getting refined. There are playbooks for this, right? There is a paint by numbers, how do you create business networks, that we go through as IBM at least. And I'm sure many others have similar approaches too. And so we're refining constantly, but ultimately you are still trying to create a technology-based startup with companies who, in many cases, have traditionally always hated each other. And that's not necessarily the best grounding from which to start. Usually it's friends from university, or people who've grown up together, or who are serendipitously brought together because of a similar vision. This is the exact opposite of that.
Well, if you want to lose a friend, buy an apartment with him or her, a few of them, and then try to agree on noise levels, when curfew time, and how to divvy up the fridge. That's how you lose the friend. So I believe that's about equivalent in the corporate world, where you have a whole lot more at stakes. So how do you, I know you mentioned paint by numbers, in the context of enterprise. That's obviously, it's better to have that starting point than not to have that starting point. But I believe in the end, you will end up with something somewhat custom every time. So what is the process of getting on the same page? What allows people to rally up that historically, even if they didn't necessarily hate each other, but, may have been competitors and might have had different philosophical views. How do you get them on the same page? How do you have them agree on what the end goal is? And what timeline are we looking at?
So it's a bit like mating elephants, right? As you do everything very slowly, very deliberately.
I've never done it. I don't
Well, let me tell you, that was an analogy more than it was personal empirical experience. But it is very deliberate. It is very, very facilitated. But there's, again, a few kind of guiding principles for how you get there. You can get to the design pattern for where your blockchain network is going to start in a month, if you get things right, and if you get everybody aligned, or in some cases you start with a founder network where it's a large manufacturer or a large organization who's bringing together their second and third tier. Right? I'm not saying you coerce them or you force them into participation, but you've already got friendly parties in the room, as opposed to when you start with peers, if you're trying to create an industry utility.
With the pressure, gentle pressure.
Yeah, you can look at that. Again, there are different models, right? Horizontal or vertical. Vertical, you start with, you can start with a big founder and bring the friendly parties together. Peer networks, horizontals, industry horizontals are typically harder or take longer to get there because of more of the participants, logistics. How do you get to scale? All of that. Starting off, what are the use cases, right? What are the problems we're trying to solve? What are the issues we're trying to address? And what would good look like? Typically, what you want to make sure is that those are non-competitive issues. Oftentimes, it ends up with boring and mundane things like KYC or settlement and reconciliation or procurement-related things that honestly aren't going to set the world on fire and aren't particularly sexy, but it's a good place to start. And everybody can agree that we want to improve that.
Procurement becomes really sexy when, our supply chain doesn't work and we can't get toilet paper. That's as sexy as it gets when you're missing rice and basic necessities. So I don't know what you're talking about. We just experienced the effect of shortages, and it definitely made the supermarket one of the sexiest places on earth.
I think you're misrepresenting sexy on that one. I think it makes it urgent for sure. But certainly coming to something that's non-competitive and that will not disadvantage any of the parties. An important thing to realize that in some cases, as you start thinking about how industries are constructed, there are intermediaries in the way. In the financial sector with custodians, in some processes where trade happens and you have people whose deliberate job is to be a trusted third party for taking information from one party and giving it to the other, or consolidating information from people into the middle. That process can be done digitally. But if you're asking that intermediary, do you want to be digitized? And in many cases, they don't. I've consulted to intermediary organizations who say, well, what's the role of blockchain and how might it transform the industry? Is it, you may not exist. If we get this right, you go away. And
that's usually not an exciting news for the folks in the know. I can only imagine why. Very cool. So you start with, mundane important stuff, things like KYC, things like how we get goods from point A to B, how do we shift a supply chain due to disaster, whatever. Do you ever get to more interesting, controversial stuff?
Always. And it's really starting there that's important because you've got common ground. But the other part of building these sorts of platforms is you never really want to have a platform for one application, unless that one application is so strong and so irrefutably beneficial that that's all it needs to do forever. And you could put Bitcoin in that category.
Tell us why. Why you kind of think ideally parties should have more ties in the platform?
Because typically the business case won't stack up if you're only solving one small problem or solving a problem that's part of a bigger picture. Right? If you try to carve off that one small piece of a problem, the low-hanging fruit first, if you're going to sustain a technology platform that is complex, that needs to have a degree of governance, a degree of support, a degree of continual management, and that can be really small, right? That can just be keeping it on a cloud somewhere. But it may also be continual updates, upgrades, integrations as core platforms for different industries and sectors move. Some of that technology needs to move along with it. The more you add as underlying management, the smaller number of benefits cases, the less viable that platform is going to be commercially over time.
So basically, because of upfront investment and ongoing maintenance, the parties are much more likely to have enthusiasm for participating if they're receiving value from the undertaking.
For sure. And look at Amazon, right? If it's not a great analogy, but essentially what they've done is they built a very large global e-commerce platform with payments and cross-border and fulfillment and support services. Imagine if all they did was just sell books, right? The profitability of that business. I don't
think we can imagine that world anymore. Some of us are old enough to remember, and some of us are even, surprised when we now see Amazon bookstores in the world. But I think that's kind of an unimaginable future, right?
And look, here's the other part of it is that you're not building a platform because blockchain. You're building a platform because you believe that those multiple industry partners or peers working together allows us to change things for the better. That could be relating to carbon footprint. That could be related to sustainable sourcing. That could be related to anti-fraud. Pick your problem, ideally one that the world needs solving, and go at it together. Chances are that collaboration framework is going to yield other things over time. So focus on that. Make that the mission of that cooperative, and you're going to find more use cases and more value and transform the industry for general betterment as you go forward.
Do you find that, and I think that's what you're alluding to, that picking a goal bigger than just sort of your daily profits and kind of running of the operations, but actually kind of improving industry, maybe even the world at large, helps kind of get people on the same page, both about the mundane stuff and actually kind of things that historically has not allowed them to solve the sort of communal problems.
So I'm absolutely for people, planet, profit. I also sort of don't kind of ignore the fact that capitalism is still a thing, and particularly when you get down to small to medium-sized enterprises.
It's a total thing, and I grew up in a place that has alternatives, and I'm telling you, it's not much better. So capitalism is a thing, and let's stick with it for now.
we'll do that one for notes to your illegal self on the next podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you have to get down to the nuts and bolts of, is this going to help improve the profitability or have incentives for small to medium sized enterprises eventually? Because to scale a platform, you're going to want them on there and you're going to want them to contribute. But if there is a societal or a regulatory goal on top of the mundane use cases, the more the better. And we're going to see that increasingly in carbon footprint, in sustainable sourcing, in ethical sourcing, in social impact, in general governance, increasingly for the next forever.
I agree. I think it's partially because those problems are visible, and I think your employees or customers demanding it. So you have pressure all around. Plus, it's much easier thing to rally up against around. I want to talk about if you were going to use Consortia using, I don't know, Hyperledger or using Ethereum or Polkadot or whatever else, would this process, kind of the process of theory, maybe the process of building may be different depending on technology, but is the process of sort of getting together, getting on the same page, would that differ from technology to technology, or that's largely kind of the same stuff?
So it is rarely a great idea to start with, I've got Ethereum, I want to build a consortium on it. Better to start with, I have a business problem, or I have a need, or I have a thing that the world needs to solve. I believe we need to solve it together. Let's go through the requirements of what is going to be most effective. And I've spent most of my career working across different platforms, and the needs are different depending on whether you want to use tokens, whether you need from a regulatory perspective or from a legal perspective to identify individuals or entities that you're transacting with. Public platforms, you can have hybrid as well. So you can have the KYC and the identity management, but anchor the data to a public platform if that's important to you. There's also a kind of consideration on which consensus algorithm are you going to use because of the energy efficiency or the energy usage. I had a client the other day say, tell me how much kilowatts per transaction this particular platform you want to use is. I'm not going to say which one because it could have been any. Doesn't really matter which one. But clients are now asking, is this computationally expensive to use? And that's material to people at this stage and should be. And for public networks, we have layer twos. So we're addressing that problem. It's just another way of how you architect for consolidating transactions and still using a public permissionless network.
Yeah, I think it will be very important. I think increasingly you see companies sort of self-report on their carbon footprint. I also think over time we're going to see requirements for public companies to actually report it for investors' purposes. So the transparency and sort of more disclosure is definitely kind of the way of the future. So you may as well kind of actively think about it as you build your blockchain network. Actually, I'm going to ask you a technical question. I've had a conversation with my previous guest around the importance of an ability to switch with the push of a button from one network to another. For example, the price of Ethereum, sometimes goes way, way up, and gas could be expensive. Sometimes the network can be congested and whatever else may happen. What are your thoughts about, the sort of connecting the archipelago of blockchain islands through the network, where with the push of a button, this is a lawyer speaking about technology, by the way.
You're doing a brilliant job, Olga. You're smashing it.
But somewhere in the back end, you push the button and the highways are redirected. Thoughts on that?
So there's probably an analogy for this within enterprise already, where you will have data existing on different clouds, and you will have versioning of which version of the data exists and which is the true and latest view of the certain state of something. In clouds, it's harder because you can, to some extent, have the same state exist on different servers, or a double spend type of problem with cloud-based servers, which blockchain is designed not to have as a problem. connecting multiple ledgers, connecting multiple state engines, state machines to be able to figure out which is the actual version of the truth is hard. But lots are working on it. Network congestion, cost of transactions, that's what the layer 2s are for. If you look at Polygon or if you look at Polkadot or any number of others, there are plenty there who can consolidate down transactions, reduce the computational requirement. Are you going to see network of networks type stories where you're seeing the provenance of a good linked to the shipping activity, and can you tether identities of shipments to cargo movements to financial transactions? We're doing that already, right? So from a number of examples, what IPM is doing and others across WeTrade to Tradelens to Food Trust, that network of networks capability exists today. In the public space, harder. Do we desperately need it? I would love to be able to see NFTs porting across chains. Because I think that creates a better experience, right? When you have an NFT that's minted, but that's used in a particular metaverse, that's owned then or interacted with a particular individual, celebrity, somebody who adds value to the experience or the context of that, to then allowing that to move off into wherever you choose to transact or share that particular experience or trade that later. There are going to be multi-metaverse platforms that become really, really important. And that MetaMask NFT experience, that journey, that's one that I think we're going to have to work hard to get right, because if it's not as seamless as existing gaming or social experiences, people aren't going to be able to use it.
Yeah, you will exclude pretty much everyone from participating, and it's a collaborative experience, and collaboration is much more fun when you have the network effect. So completely worth solving this problem. I have many questions, and we are running out of time, so I'm going to ask you a question that is near and dear to me. That is the question of governance. Agreeing on the rules of the game of a consortium before it begins, and super critical because sometimes rules of the game are outcome determinative, and depending who goes first and what's more important, that's really a question of wins and losses in the long term. What is the process of agreeing on the rules of the game when it comes to consortia?
So it's very similar to any strategy. You go through the common problems of what is our network intent? What are we here to achieve? And getting alignment on that to start with is critically important. Where are we going to play? What are going to be the use cases or the roadmap that we're going to focus on? How are we going to win, or how are we going to achieve our goals in terms of what is it that we need in terms of people, process, technology to be able to enable that? And investment, a very clear commercial framework around who will invest what quantum at what stage. Then what capabilities do we need? What is the organizational structure? What is the legal structure? What's the legal entity structure? Again, lawyers required in all of these things. Then, importantly, what are the rules to change the rules? And this is something that a lot of people don't think about.
It's actually the most important thing in the end of the day, because one thing we know for sure: times change, politics change, economics change, technology change, and then disasters happen. So you need to change the rules of the game. And if you don't have the rule about how to change the rule, you will likely never end up changing the rule because people will disagree about the process.
Correct. And then you'll have a platform that may not be functional, that may not work. So the ability to have checkpoints, governance around what happens if we need to modify or look at a different legal entity, look at a different funding structure, if we want to open it up to investment from non-founding members, onboarding and offboarding, always really important to think about at the beginning. And again, there's 6, 7, 8 years of experience on how to make that work. Even before, there was experience of that before blockchain. So there are legal precedents, there are frameworks for all of these things that are established. The jurisdiction does matter to some extent, but I don't really want to get into that because it's super boring.
Yeah,
but you guys, lawyers love this stuff though, right?
This is not about jurisdiction. This is really just agreeing. It's actually not all that different from just corporate documents, period. It's and deciding that is very important for the future of organization. We're coming to the end. I want to ask you last question about various projects that are that's been out in the press, the Tradelens, We Trade, the Food Trust. Pick one, the one that you like the best, the one that you think will have the most impact, the one that is more recent, whatever. And tell us how, I guess, the world is a better place because of it, and how much impact it will have.
Ooh, that's like asking me to pick my favorite child. How could you do that?
At least I didn't ask you to pick your favorite finger and chop off the other one.
I didn't realize that was an option. That was not in the T's and C's before I joined this live.
To be clear, I did not have you sign anything. So you are here on your own free will because you just can't get enough of my company.
This is true. This has been a lot of fun, and we must do another one because we barely even scratched the surface on all the things we wanted to talk about. If I were to pick one in terms of, I would probably go for what is the most fungible, what is the most reusable capability, and how can that benefit the most, right? You talked about having the most impact. If you talk about the cost, the efficiency saving that Tradelens has transformed shipping, logistics, getting products to people, reducing waste, that's huge, right? If you look at WeTrade and allowing financing to flow to small businesses and for trade, right? The trillions of dollar trade gap of allowing businesses to transact globally, both huge. But I'm going to go a little bit in terms of close to heart, because the ability to create a shared source of data, provenance, identity, source of information and truth in any industry context that Food Trust has given us, and the underlying digital capabilities on Food Trust can be applied in millions of non-food related entities, right? We're not using it only for food. The same engine is being used for commodities, being used for carbon, being used for a whole bunch of stuff. Right? Take your pick. That supply chain provenance engine, I think, has the opportunity to transform multi-party sustainability and carbon initiatives. That is closest to my heart because I care about sustainability. I care about the planet. I care that my children have a safe and secure and sustainable planet to continue living on when I'm long gone. Mm-hmm. And so that's where my heart goes. Although the numbers that WeTrade and Tradelens are enabling is also pretty impressive.
I promise we'll do it again because I really wanted to get to that conversation, and I think we should do part 2 because we can't do it quickly and we don't have enough time. So we'll do part 2. Anthony, this was awesome. I truly enjoyed it. Every time I talk to you, I glow. It's only 9:47 o'clock in the morning here, and I'm already super excited. So thank you for this. This was awesome.
It's been my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for the work that you do in helping to break down complex topics into things that the rest of the community can relate to. That's something that I don't know whether all lawyers are great at, but I know that you are. And thank you for what you do for the community too.
Oh, thank you. I heard you too, quite a lot. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Anthony is full of great information. He produces a lot of useful blockchain content. I consume it on a daily basis. I invite you to follow him. He does amazing work. We'll have him back, but that cannot substitute for a daily dose of Anthony. Bye, everyone.